Hey everybody, welcome to Crackpot, the podcast where each and every week we dive into a different conspiracy theory and we discuss the merits or the demerits of each. We're your hosts. I'm Tim.
And I'm Zach. And Timothy, we have a very special guest here today. We've got Matthew Coller here on, joining us from Purple Insider. You can find it on Substack, and he has a daily podcast as well. Also wrote a book, which is crazy exciting, Making of a Miracle. So Matthew Coller, thank you for joining the show. Welcome to Crackpot.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That's all the things you can produce when you have nothing else to do and can't go anywhere.
I was going to say, we can certainly relate in terms of trying to create content here. And actually, you know, the work from home, shelter in place stuff actually benefited us to some degree in being able to focus on this stuff.
Do you have an album or anything else like that? Are you on Spotify?
Now, you make a joke, but I do, make music from time to time. I play guitar, so I've had plenty of time to do that too.
There we go.
Jamming out and watching YouTube videos and trying to take lessons and things like that. And my wife has been learning to play chess. And so, we're doing all the typical kind of like quarantine type of things. We try to make yourself a little bit better.
Love it.
Well, I wish I could say the same, but hats off to you. So amazing. So Matthew, just real quick, because I think a large percentage of our audience here may not be super dialed into the NFL, but of course you are. Tim and I are both huge fans. We've done a couple of different topics relating to conspiracy theories about the NFL. But before we jump in, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? So I know, Matthew, a couple of years ago you started with was it ESPN, like kind of that Purple Daily at the time? I heard you and I was like, oh, wow, this guy's talented. I loved your takes. And then to see you go on and continue doing your work is incredible. But do you mind telling us about your journey here to Minnesota? Because you're not a native. So.
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate that. I grew up in the Buffalo area, so I'm very used to teams that have lost 4 Super Bowls. And
Buffalo,
so
New York, to be clear, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, right, because there is a Buffalo, Minnesota. Yeah. Yes. So Buffalo, New York, which imagine to my surprise, there's also a Rochester, Minnesota, and there's a Rochester, New York as well. I did not know that when I moved here. But I grew up there. And just like everybody else, loved sports. And so went to college for sports management. And then that sort of transitioned into sports writing. And then I got an internship at a radio station and it kind of took off from there. And I ended up working at the Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Sabres flagship station in Buffalo. And so I kind of climbed the ladder there from the part-timer to the, update anchor to the producer. And eventually, in a place like that, in a market that's not that big, if you're that guy, you probably have to go somewhere else because it's long established hosts in those positions. And it's not like there's 11 sports radio stations in a market like that. There's one. So I ended up getting a job in Minnesota at ESPN 1500 to cover the Vikings, which went really well. I came here as kind of like a digital reporter. So it's just writing for the website, doing a podcast. And then eventually that turned into hosting my own show that was every day focused around the Minnesota Vikings until COVID hit, which shut down our station, which caused me then to go the Substack route and go the podcast route, start my own thing. And that has been honestly a kind of a blessing in disguise and an incredible experience because one, I don't think that a lot of people in media really realize their worth. And I started to find that out by how many people signed up, how many downloads there were, and how much, honestly, money I could make. It really surprised me compared to my salary. And not only that, but it's been really fun to work for myself and do it my way and design it my way and not have HR or sales meetings. and if we do, I'm running them.
I was going to say, you just be mad at yourself instead, right? So
that's right. So I've been able to bring on another full-time writer to work with me, and then a part-time sales assistant, other part-time hosts that come on from time to time. And we're approaching year 1 of doing this. And I can honestly say it has been one of the most fun years, if not the most fun year of my professional career, even though everything has been a complete cluster with how, the NFL had to be covered and doing Zoom calls. Just before we recorded this, I was on a Zoom call with a new Minnesota Viking player, and I would love to get back to regular press conferences and doing the job the normal way. But it's been really fun to build this and kind of feel like I am not only a reporter, but also a business owner now.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. Well, I was going to say, I have to assume with the COVID thing, obviously, put a wrench into plans, probably in terms of how you were interviewing players, getting team access. You're and not only that, but also the players, right? So it's putting or throwing a wrench totally into their what their plans are. But I have to imagine it's been A, very difficult to start your own business, and then B, doing it all remotely. It's got to be like a whole other situation. So.
Yeah, and like I said, there wasn't a whole lot else going on, so I had time. But it was a ton of work. Yes, to build the website the way you want it to look, and to do all the podcast things. And now I edit all of my own podcasts, which takes time rather than just being on the radio and selling ads to sponsors. It takes time and it takes work. So it's going beyond all that stuff as a journalist that you were already doing, and then adding another basically like part-time job of just making this all operate. But I mean, that's been really rewarding from the perspective you're talking about of like what the players had to deal with and how we had to work with them. That was maybe the biggest downside for me, because one of the things that I've always enjoyed doing is going into the locker room and just having conversations with players, not necessarily interviews. I mean, a lot of times you're interviewing guys, but you learn a little bit here or there just about who they are, and you form a bond with them. Right. So then when you do want to do a big feature story or something on their background, it's a lot easier to go to them and say, hey, I'd really like to write about that whatever thing that happened in your life or interest that you have. And this year there was one time where I'm interviewing a guy that had a lot of things that were really deep happen to him throughout his college time, and he was drafted by the Vikings. And it was like, hello, we're on a Zoom call together. Nice to meet you. Like I normally would shake your hand. We'd have some conversation, learn a little bit about each other, and then we would talk about, these things that you went through. But in this case, it was kind of like, well, we've got the Zoom for 40 minutes and then it shuts down after that, the kind of thing. So, and going to games was just downright creepy. There's no one in the stands, and everything is just echoing. The cool part was you could hear some of the stuff from down on the field that you'd never hear before, but it was like playing in a morgue. I mean, everybody did not want any part of that experience. So let's hope that doesn't have to happen again. And biggest problem, press box food. They didn't have the same setup. So obviously I was victimized the most by that.
Clearly. I was worried about that. So Matthew, again, really excited to have you on. And, because we're a conspiracy theory show, we love to delve into various conspiracy theories, sports related, as well as other topics. But, we talked a few years ago about, what was it? Michael Jordan leaving the NBA because of potentially a gambling conspiracy theory. We've talked Cal Ripkin Jr.
Kevin Costner.
And
everyone knows that story, yeah.
So we cover a little bit of everything, but one of the first shows that we did 3 years ago, and it was actually one of the first shows that I researched, was related to whether or not the NFL is rigged. And of course, there are a couple of different angles to this. And before we jump in any further, Matthew, I want to ask you, at first blush, is the NFL rigged? According to what you've seen,
okay.
Just...
So real quick though, let me tell you a quick Kevin Costner, Cal Ripkin story.
Please.
So one of the things that under normal circumstances my wife and I like to do is if we go to a new city, we like to tour a ballpark. Like, you tour the ballpark in the morning and then go to the game at night or something. Mm-hmm. So we were in Baltimore to take the tour of Camden Yards. And toward the end of the tour, the guy, they show you behind the scenes a little bit, things like that. The tour guide brought up that theory and wanted us all to know that never happened. Like, that stuff's bad.
Nothing to see here, folks.
Sounds a little defensive.
Yeah, right.
I'm just saying.
You gotta be kidding me.
Right.
Oh, wow.
And the thing was, I wasn't even really familiar with that. I mean, that happened in the mid 90s. So I didn't remember that being a thing. So what do you think I did? Googled it, of course.
Right.
So,
hey, everybody, do not look over here, whatever you do.
Right.
Jeez.
That's hilarious.
Right. So just in case you ever happen to be, at Camden Yards, maybe you'll get the tour guide who tells you that Kevin Costner did not do that. But as far as the rigged thing goes, I think that there are some instances where the referees are in a position to let a game kind of be over, or you can throw a flag on a penalty that did happen and keep a game going. And that would be the most that you would maybe see it. And I know that this has happened with the NBA and Tim Donaghy and how he talked about having specific orders for who they wanted or things like that, or it was made clear to them. I don't think it's that way, but I think maybe there's a little human nature to it. I mean, there was a game, a couple of years ago where it stuck out to me, where it was the Chargers and the Ravens in the playoffs. and I think the Chargers got a first down late in the game that would have just iced it. It would have been over. They would have been kneeling down for like 2 straight minutes. And instead, they called the holding call and gave Lamar Jackson one more chance to go, And I think that if you look really close, that you will see some of those things at times. But that's the only thing I can really think of. I mean, and that might be human nature of referees. Like, it was a holding and we'll give him one more chance here, or we missed the call earlier. You've seen this in hockey with the guy with the hot mic where he said, we missed the call earlier, so I got to get a penalty on them. And there's also the home field advantage that goes along with refereeing too. Like, I grew up in Buffalo, the Music City Miracle. That was in Tennessee. There was no way they were going to call that a forward pass, though I will go to the grave saying that was a forward pass. So, I think that maybe that's it. But in terms of the NFL scripting at the beginning of the season, how they want it to play out, who they want to win, I think that's a really, really tough sell, because I'm not sure anybody wanted Rex Grossman to be quarterbacking a Super Bowl. So, I mean, there's just – I don't know how you would possibly lay that out so specifically, especially with things like injuries and randomness, and the ball is shaped funny and bounces weird. I mean, I don't know how you would ever really design that to happen.
But what about, though, Matthew, just to play devil's advocate here for a sec, what about, a team has a new stadium coming in, right? The LA Rams, the infamous Saints, was it non-pass interference call? No, pass interference call, right? And gave the Rams a fresh set of downs, so on and so forth. I mean, like, isn't there an incentive for some of the bigger markets to have, like, the NFL maybe not directly scripting out, let's just say, how the games will play out, but maybe incentivizing or hoping at least that certain things go a certain way?
Well, I think that you can probably look around at who won and start to find reasons why they might have won, or reasons why they might have made it to the Super Bowl. It's like the one with the Patriots gets brought up all the time after 9/11. But it's like, well, what about the New York teams, though? They didn't want the New York teams. They wanted a team with from the city that everyone from New York can't stand. That's what they want, right? Like, and also the quarterback turned out to be the best quarterback of all time. So that also might have something to do with it. Yes, and I know it came down to the referees with a funky call, as it so often does. But one of the things about that, though, is, and the pass interference you mentioned, if you've ever been on the field, and we are for training camp, where we are right there on the sideline, I'd love any of you guys to try to referee. Like, it is insane that they even get it as close as they do. Yeah. Like, that looks, they slow it down to the millisecond, and wow, he was there way early. But if you were standing right there on the sideline and you saw how fast that was actually happening, you could understand why that was missed and how that could have been messed up. The other point, too, is New Orleans had plenty of opportunities to win that game still, and they didn't. That went to overtime. I mean, there's things with the Vikings all the time that have gone wrong in playoff games. And you go back and you look, and you're like, well, look, I know Brett Favre threw the interception at the end, but they had all sorts of opportunities to win that game. And so if it's a call in the first quarter that's wrong, is that trying to push it one way or another, or is it only the ones that we really notice, Right.
Well, you touched on the Patriots winning the Super Bowl after 9/11, and that was kind of the mother of all conspiracy theories in terms of the NFL, because of course, you remember the quarterback before Tom Brady, correct?
Drew Bledsoe, right.
Mm-hmm. What was his number?
Oh, really? Is that a real thing? Is that number 11?
And which team did they suffer a game-ending, or did he suffer a game-ending injury with?
The Jets. Oh. I'm still missing the connections, but okay.
Obviously, the Twin Towers, being taken down by jets. That was the conspiracy theory angle.
Oh, I get. Okay.
So
wow.
That was very, very. That was the smoking gun, the silver tuna, if you will, in terms of the NFL being rigged, which we certainly got a kick out of. But, one that was actually really interesting to me, though, was actually the Ravens 49ers Super Bowl, right? And so that was, hey, look, the power goes out right after the halftime. The 49ers were just sluggish, and they turned it around right after that, right? And so it was like they came back out. Perhaps did the NFL want the 49ers to win? Did something happen there? It seems all very, very suspicious. Your thoughts quickly.
Well, how many Super Bowls have been blowouts? Like this year it was.
Yeah.
This year's a good example with Kansas City and Tampa Bay. they want Mahomes to be the star, or they wanted Brady to get one more. It's like, well, whoever wins, you can kind of push the narrative whichever way you want. And this is the only time that has ever happened, and it was with an older stadium. I mean, I don't know. Like when the Broncos played the Seattle Seahawks in the Super Bowl, wouldn't the NFL have wanted Peyton Manning to play great in that game and have it be really exciting, and it's a young quarterback versus the old quarterback, and it's a shootout offensively, and instead it's like 43-8 and you just get killed, right? Like nobody shut off the lights that night. And as someone who grew up in Buffalo, there were a few games against the Dallas Cowboys or against Washington in the Super Bowl that I wish they shut the lights off for and gave the Bills another chance to come back. So, yeah, I think that was super random. And the way they were caught off guard, too. I mean, everybody seemed like they were really caught off guard. I remember the broadcast got criticized quite a bit for how they handled it. Sure. Like, it didn't seem like everyone was like, oh, lights are off. And, there was
random.
I love that these exist. Yeah. The same with like curses being from Buffalo, moving to Minnesota. These places. And one that comes up all the time is like, they don't want the Bills to win the Super Bowl. Like, really? I don't know. This is the other part of it, too, because everyone talks about these, like, well, what about the TV ratings and stuff like this? Like, that's what they want. The big markets. Like, when do they ever struggle? They never struggle. They can do whatever they want. If the Bills made the Super Bowl this year, it would have been an incredible story, and everybody would have loved it, right? So, I don't know. It's almost like they're almost too big to fail, to the point where they wouldn't need to do any of this stuff to succeed, because they're just this gargantuan moneymaker. If they don't have a highly rated Super Bowl because there's an election that year or whatever happens, or highly rated playoffs, did it hurt them? I mean, they just signed like a $10 billion TV contract. So, sure. I mean, that's where I always think, like, what's the real motivation when they have these TV contracts and the money's already in the bank?
Exactly. Well, and also I think the NFL is very, very experienced at getting in their own way too. And so I feel like, oftentimes the executives overthink things and all these other things. And it's just like there are too many blusters for there to be an actual, scripted or perhaps rigged NFL. Well, thanks, Matthew, for joining us here. Just an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I know that some of these conspiracy theories are a little bit silly, but also they're a lot of fun. And I feel like with sports, there's just so little to lose in terms of, what the risk is there. We're not talking about like a global pandemic or something like that. This is just pure fun. It's for entertainment. So thanks so much for coming on the show here. And I want to say, check out Matthew Coller on purpleinsider.substack.com. Follow him on Twitter. Check out his book on Amazon, Making of a Miracle. And anything else you want to plug while you're on the show?
Man, you covered it pretty well. And I want to say that I do love the conspiracy talk. I mean, I think it's great. I think it adds like an extra, the 9/11 one notwithstanding. Yeah, but like the other things, that they add just a layer to fan mythology of the time you got the bad call that screwed you over. And it sort of just builds up the love for sports ultimately in kind of a bizarre way. But anything that adds more mythology to sports, I think, is generally good.
Well, and especially because there's always a loser, right? So people are always looking for an excuse or an understanding of figuring out why did they lose, right? So couldn't possibly be that their team wasn't good enough. Well, thanks for jumping on, Matthew.
All right. Hey, let's switch gears just a hot minute here, because for most of us who don't consume the NFL 24/7, 365, it's actually baseball season, Zach.
It's hard to believe, too. And I feel like, let me know if you agree here or disagree, but like January and February and kind of March so far went fairly quickly. So I'm like,
that's an interesting take. That's a very interesting take. Yeah. Like time's speeding up again, huh?
Do you agree with that?
I do. I haven't thought about that till now. I definitely believe that.
I know a handful of people, and this is like through work, and that are like, what's with January and February just like fast forward,
just gone,
like speed demons. Like, yeah. So, and all of a sudden now we're looking at the date here. It's right at the end of March, which means
time of recording.
Exactly. Yep. And that means also now we're into early April when this drops, but it's like, dude, where did the time go? Because I swear, probably March 2020 through December 2020 could not.
Oh, that was about 6 years long.
Oh, it was insane. And then all of a sudden this year's like an overdrive. So Tim, we spent the first half of the show revealing our big time sports affiliations, at least from a football standpoint. So I'm curious, do you hold a similar affiliation for the Milwaukee Brewers. You're a Wisconsin guy. What's your
you know
story?
that's funny. I mean, I am a Brewers fan, but I mean, moving here, I'm less of a Brewers fan.
Really?
Very much so. And even when I was there, like, my affiliation was the Packers. Like, that was my team, and which is odd because I would go to, like, I don't know, 6, 10, 12 Brewers games a year, where I think I've been to 4 Packer games in my life. So
really?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
If someone asked me, like, who's your baseball team just on the street, I'd be like,
Twins.
You're weird. Why are you asking me that question?
Yeah, first of all, what are you doing?
First of all, come back here with my wallet. But no, I would say Brewers, but I got nothing against, like, no, that's not true. I was going to say I have nothing against the Twins, but just like the Vikings, I hate the Twins organization. I want to be a Twins fan. That's the difference. I will never, ever be a Vikings fan, but I would love to be a Twins fan. But they just run such an awful organization that it's just like, I can't invest in that. And also, I'll be honest, like, I've kind of fallen out of love with baseball over the last decade or so. But, that's just me. How about you? If it were not the Twins, who would it be for you?
So I always loved the Giants, like, as a kid, the San Francisco Giants. So
yeah.
to me, that was like a fun team to watch. I really loved Will Clark. He was a great first baseman.
Second base, yeah.
First.
He was first. I knew that. I was checking you. I had the baseball. I can see the Dunruss baseball card in my head with the sunglasses. But
Isn't that crazy? Yes. Well, I mean, from like 88 to probably 92, and I forget what year the lockout was, but like for those 4 years, somewhere, like 93, 94, for those 4 years, I was the guy or the kid with like the complete collection year after year of tops, right?
Yes.
Trading for Stadium Club, like all this stuff. It's like, it's insane. And I haven't touched one since. I think the lockout just destroyed baseball for me for some reason.
It kind of did. A lot of people. So Giants is what you're saying.
Giants, but I will say through and through a Twins fan, though I haven't watched a Twins game in probably 5 or 6 years.
We should go.
We should.
That's
a very good point.
Why not? Who's stopping us?
Nobody.
Absolutely no.
Technically, not a person.
Not a person, but that giant global pandemic. Okay, so I'm curious, what kind of baseball conspiracy? Because we've done a few in the past, as we touched on. We did the Cal Ripkin, Kevin Costner, Michael Jordan. I would classify as baseball. I feel like there's another couple in there.
Yeah,
as well,
I think you're right. Yeah, escaping me right now, but
what do you got?
Well, so this is interesting because as a kid, I remember hearing my dad talk a lot about Pete Rose and just what an extraordinary player he was.
One of the best ever. And honestly, one of the best ever.
It's true. And one of the things that utterly confused me was just kind of what happened with him. And it turns out we'll give a super high level overview of what happened, and then we'll talk about the conspiracy theory. But basically, Pete Rose was accused. Should we say allegedly?
No, I think he admitted it, to be honest.
Allegedly admitted it to throwing games, right? Yeah. To betting on games.
Well, betting on games is bad. Don't get me wrong, but also betting against his own team.
Exactly. That well said, right? So he is in essence throwing a game, and so doing so probably for any sport, obviously huge no. But also there are like financial implications involved too, which is crazy to think about. It's not just about the sport anymore when you're talking about something like that. So Pete Rose, so the conspiracy theory is he was issued a lifetime ban by Bart Giamatti. And what's odd is that Pete Rose, for many, many years after, and even kind of right around the time that this happened, I wouldn't say he argued that he was innocent, but he was downplaying, I think, the extent to which...
and the severity of it.
The severity of it, exactly right. Which seemed to kind of puzzle everybody. He was either living in extreme denial, or perhaps something else was going on.
Yeah.
And so that ties back into the conspiracy theory here.
Oh, okay.
Which is that perhaps Bart Giamatti, the then commissioner of baseball, and Pete Rose had an agreement in which the lifetime ban would be removed or rescinded.
Oh.
And Pete Rose could go back to either, somehow being involved in baseball, whether it was coaching or playing or whatever the case may be.
It's like a handshake agreement. Hey, I got to punish you.
Yep.
But we're,
sit it out for a couple of years.
We got to let the heat come off.
Exactly.
Okay.
People forget about it.
Yeah.
And what happened? Well, what happened was Bart Giamatti dies 8 days after the ban.
Oh.
After the lifetime ban for Pete Rose, which is like all of a sudden you've got Pete Rose now who had a gentleman's agreement, shall we say, with Bart Giamatti.
Allegedly.
Thank you. All of a sudden now, hey, look, who's going to believe him, right?
Right. Like, no, seriously, he was gonna take this away. I was gonna get into the Hall of Fame. I just had to wait a couple decades. Come on.
Right.
Dude.
What's your take, my man?
Well, okay, so that doesn't really explain his behavior, though, honestly.
Elaborate.
If I were Pete Rose and the guy I made the handshake agreement with, died 8 days after this announcement was made, I would be on my best behavior constantly, proving to people that like this lifetime ban did not need to stand. Like, I'm actually good. I've repented. I've seen the sins of my ways. Let me back in. Pete Rose, for as good of a baseball player as he was, and honestly, like one of the best, can we say probably not the greatest human being?
Yeah. There's some stuff there.
There's some stuff.
Yeah.
There's some stuff. I know someone, a high school teacher of mine, ran or I think still runs like an autograph business. And all sorts of players, all sorts of teams. He would just, he brings them in for a weekend, and they just sign like 1,000 things, and then he sells them, and it's it's really cool. Pete Rose will sign anything for enough money.
Okay,
anything. Now, part of that might be because of the black mark next to his name, where dude's got to feed his family, kind of thing. Or he's just like only driven by the dollar, and he never, ever learned his lesson.
Well, that's an interesting juxtaposition, because it's kind of like, on the one hand, he could be doing it because, he could no longer play baseball, could no longer support his family, whatever the case may be. On the other hand, it could be, he's actually just in it for money. Exhibit A, this is more proof, right? Come out and sign this baseball. Come out and sign this podcast.
Well, what do you think? What do you think about the conspiracy?
Well, I don't like it, obviously, when we're talking about somebody who dies. Whenever there's a conspiracy theory, so to know that Bart Giamatti did, in fact, pass away from a heart attack within 8 days of this, alleged gentleman's agreement is really, that's tough. I don't want to, make fun of that. But also, I think that, or I don't think that the stakes are high enough in baseball to where somebody's either going to die over an agreement or, look, Pete Rose, nobody can prove him wrong in this case, right? Especially if it's a gentleman's agreement. So it's like, it's hard to believe that, the world was against him and he can no longer prove it. But I kind of don't believe it whenever we're talking about like a professional sport and people dying.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So this is one of those that I got to say falls into the hard to believe category.
Hard to believe. Possible. Let's not rule out the fact that it is possible. It's not like we're saying, Bigfoot, killed Bart Giamatti and blah blah blah. It's like that, you could make an argument for it. We could get someone on with a little bit more knowledge of the intricacies and all this sort of stuff, and I'd be like, yeah, that actually starts to make sense. But that being said, I just don't believe it. Honestly, what it comes down to for me is that Pete Rose, the thing about baseball is there's so much history. There's so much to it. It's just steeped in its own history and lore and everything else. And there's a stat for everything.
Sure.
That's one of the cool things about baseball. There's a stat for everything, and you can compare players from the 20s to players from the 70s to the 90s and all this stuff. And then when you are caught cheating in such a blatant fashion, you disrupt that internal order that exists, that it's propped up by, that baseball is propped up by. So I don't think a commissioner would just kind of try to wave this away, no matter how good he was.
Sure.
That being said, I do think that Pete Rose will make it to the Hall of Fame.
I was going to ask that question, actually.
Yeah. I just don't think he'll be alive to see it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, for everything else that he did, and he wasn't, as far as I know, cheating for his entire career.
Right.
I think it was mostly, and when I say cheating, what I'm actually talking about is the gambling and then gambling against. I think a lot of that was at the latter half of his playing career and then part of his coaching career. But you can't discount the fact that the guy hit 4,000 hits and just stole all those bases. I mean, he was a force to be reckoned with, and to leave him out of Cooperstown would be its own travesty. I could also see leaving him out as just a like, hey, don't mess with baseball. And I would agree with that completely. But if I were a betting man, like Pete Rose, allegedly,
that actually went over my head. I was like, oh, okay, interesting.
I would say he goes in. He just won't be there to see it.
To me, it's like a coin flip.
Yeah.
I was really honestly thinking about this today. I'm like,
Yeah.
I could see them either trying to make an example, and also when we talk like Hall of Fame stuff, it's always like, it seems pretty arbitrary.
Yeah. But you can only have so many, a year, and you can only be voted on so many times. It has to be X number of years afterwards, and yeah.
It's tough to see kind of one way. Like I could easily see it one way or the other, and I could also see, like I said, hey, let's make an example of this guy, but also kind of the more the merrier. Let's get in, let's celebrate somebody, get people excited about the past, especially if the sports maybe down with revenue, that kind of a thing. I could totally see that happening. So I got to say, for me, it's absolutely 1,000% 50-50.
Brilliant.
One last question, Tim, before we wrap it up here. Who's going to win the World Series?
Probably the Yankees. I have absolutely no idea. I do not have my finger on that pulse at all.
Well, it's funny because I thought you were going to say the Packers.
Well, now, yes, if I were a betting man, I would pick the Packers and whoever Tom Brady's rooting for. But I don't know. What do you think?
It's probably, the Yankees. You're exactly right. I honestly couldn't tell you.
Odds-on favorite. I don't know. Red Sox, Yankees. Who knows?
A big market team. And the 12-year-old Zach right now is just dying inside.
Like, oh, my God, you don't even know.
Seriously.
The second baseman.
Yeah, I know. It's terrible.
Anyway.
So.
All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in this week. It's always fun to dive into a little bit of a sports conspiracy theory every now and again, so hope you enjoyed that. And thanks for tuning in, and thank you again to Matthew Coller for calling in and helping us out. That man is fantastic. Where can you find him again? Substack, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify,
all the above,
SoundCloud.
ESPN, anything you listen to, it's all good.
All right. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your local referee about our podcast, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.